Hello everyone, welcome to another video for Communications 1. This is going to be an introductory video into InDesign. I'm going to show you how to use the program, how to use the interface, and some neat tools as well as some cool text abilities and things and stuff you can do in InDesign. Um, so again, this is the new homepage, very similar to all the other Adobe programs. If you've watched all my tutorials, you probably are familiar with this type of homepage for a different Adobe program. To get Adobe InDesign, same way you get Photoshop and Illustrator, you just go into the Creative Cloud and you install this program from there. So all your recent files are going to be here as per usual. And then if you want to create a new file, we're going to go up to the top right corner and go new file, this blue button up here. So let's click on that first. When you click on that, you get the really common new file prompt. This has got your recent templates that you've used, as well as the print templates, just like in Illustrator and just like in Photoshop. And you've also got the capability to create your own sized page. So this is, again, probably more similar now to Illustrator than to Photoshop, where you're kind of creating an actual page that you can kind of print out and use. And so we're going to set our own page size. I think the page size for AT2 is an A1, so I'm going to change the units from picas to millimeters. And I'm going to change this to an A1 size page, so that's 594 by 841. And I'm just going to make sure that it's in portrait mode. So click that little square there if you're not sure. You can flip those around by clicking those two buttons. I'm just going to make sure it's in portrait mode. And the rest is all stuff that will become important later, but for now I'm just going to leave it as the default settings. Cool, let's go create. So once you've created that, you're going to have an artboard presented to you. That's probably the most noticeable thing on the page. Again, this works very similar to Illustrator, and yeah, is much closer to Illustrator than it is to Photoshop. Going around in a clockwise rotation, you've got, again, all your main tools here for kind of drawing lines and adding text and cutting things out. If your file doesn't look like mine, I'm using the advanced settings. So just in the top, where in Illustrator we use Essentials Classic, and in Photoshop we used something else again. For InDesign, it's best to just use the advanced, but we're actually going to be changing a bit later on to typography as well. But advanced gives you all the kind of editing tools that you're going to need. The key difference in InDesign from the other programs is your layers panel, while still very important, is probably actually not as important as your links panel. And I'm going to get into that. So I'm actually just going to separate these two out so we can see both of them. So here's my layers panel and here's my links panel. Whoops, that's gone. Where did that go? To bring it back, you just click on links there. So these two panels are going to be pretty important in today's video. So essentially, where Illustrator is a vector-based line work program, so we use Illustrator to produce line work, we use Rhino to draw line work, and we use Photoshop to edit photos. We use InDesign to collate other drawings together. It's kind of like a drawing organizational program. So where this program excels is not in editing photos, not in drawing lines, not in editing line work, but putting drawings together. So for this, I'm going to need a few drawings. So the first drawing I'm going to be using today is the drawing we made in the Photoshop tutorial, which is this little cutout map of Blackwater Bay and Roselle Bay. So that's a Photoshop file. Then I'm also going to be using the Illustrator file that I showed in the mapping tutorial, which is my Wentworth Park industrial artifact map. And I'm also going to be using another file, which is a little kind of rendered image that I made for my second years doing their studio. So basically, I want to put all of these images together onto a big page, because what you're going to be doing with your composite drawings is essentially collating all the drawings you've been making over the last few weeks and in AT1, and you're going to be putting them together on a single page. Now, before I start to do that, I'm going to make a special note. You can bring in drawings which have been exported from Photoshop and Illustrator, so like PNGs, JPEGs, PDFs, and so on. Or you can also bring in active files from Illustrator and Photoshop. So this is an active file, it's got layers, I've been editing it in Illustrator. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in this file from Illustrator and straight into InDesign, and the reason I'm doing that is going to make sense in just a moment. So to bring in an image into InDesign, the first thing we need to do is go File and go Place. So File, Place. Then here's my Illustrator image. So I've just named it test.ai. So that's an Illustrator image. And I'm just going to go Open after selecting it. That's going to be reading it. And then once it's finished reading it, you get a tiny little icon of what the image looks like, the image that you're going to import into InDesign. So I can hover over anywhere I want. And when I click, that image is going to import into InDesign. So there's a few things to go over now. This is essentially a really, really high resolution file that I've taken from Illustrator. And there's a whole range of really fantastic things that I can do now that I'm in InDesign. It's a great organizational tool. The first thing to note is over in my links panel, you can see that there, where it was once empty, it now says test.ai. That's the name of the Illustrator file. So that means that that link has now successfully come into InDesign and I can find it in my links panel. The other thing is that this file is on the layer 1. So I'm actually going to go ahead and rename this layer. So to do that, you just double click on the layer name and I'm just going to type this rendered image. So just like in Illustrator and in Rhino, it's really important to keep really clear layer organization in InDesign because it gets very confusing very quickly. So I can freely move this around my page. I can put it wherever I want. It updates pretty quickly, so it's a really great program to be doing organizational things. And the other things I can do is I can start to resize this image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in the bounding box. So this is the bounding box of the resizing. And the first thing you'll notice is if I resize it to about halfway, so if I stretch it, half the image gets cut off and it doesn't actually resize. So if you're first using InDesign, you might find this as a bit of a frustrating kind of feature. What I can do is I can do a few things. The first thing is if I double click on the image, you can see that there's a red bounding box that appears. This is the bounding box for the image. So if I hold shift and I resize this image, you can see that the image itself is resizing, but the frame, let's call it a frame, through which hasn't changed. So then if I change the size of the frame, I can see the full image again. But then if I double click on it, I can resize the actual image inside that frame. So there's basically two things going on. In InDesign, you have a frame for every image, and you have the actual image. If the actual image and the frame for the image have become different sizes, there's a few ways that you can resize them to match them back up again. So the first thing you can do is if you double click on the top of the frame, that's going to snap to the boundary of wherever the image is. Then, if your frame is too large rather than too small, you can also double click on it and it's going to snap back to the image. So now my frame and my image are the same size. If I double click, they've got the same bounding box size. But as you may be kind of gathering, this is kind of a frustrating way to have to resize the image. So I reckon one of the best cheats in InDesign, it's not even a cheat, it's just a feature, is if I click on the image, and up the top here, again, if I have the advanced settings turned on, up the top here it says auto fit. If I tick auto fit now, then if I resize my image holding shift, both the canvas and the image will resize at the same time. This is a really useful tool to understand because both of these features are really important, and I'm going to explain why they're both important. So let's bring in another image. So this is an AI file, and I'm going to start to now bring in my Photoshop drawing of Blackwater Bay. So to do that, you just do the same thing. You go File, place. Then I find the PSD, which is called map.psd, so that's a Photoshop file extension name. Just double click on that or press open, and just like before, I get a tiny little thumbnail of what I'm bringing in, and I can move my mouse anywhere I want, and if I click, that image will import. Now, there is my rendered Photoshop image. So if I just zoom in, I just hold Alt and scroll on my mouse. There's my image. Now, where the bounding box resizing tool is really important is see how if I click back on the rendered image, the auto fit is ticked. And if I click on the Photoshop file, the auto fit isn't ticked. This will change depending on what you've selected for that image. So the reason it's quite nice to be able to resize it is because you may notice that the canvas size for my image is much larger than the Blackwater Bay. And if you remember back from the Photoshop file, that's because the Photoshop boundary is much larger than my bay that I cut out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize the canvas to be a better fit for the image. So there we go. If I just make the canvas a bit smaller, then it's actually going to be easier to move my map of my bay around. Once I've done that, I'm going to click on Auto Fit afterwards. And now if I hold Shift and resize it, it's really easy to resize, and the canvas boundaries are really suitable size for the image. Now, layer organization, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this Bay Map. And just like in Illustrator, if I click on these images, they're both on the rendered image layer. You can see that the blue square is appearing on that layer. Just like in Illustrator, that means that my artwork is on that layer. So I want to move my map to the Bay Map layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that little blue square and move it to the next layer up. Now, when I click on the map, a little red square appears on the Bay Map. That means that my map is on the Bay Map layer and the rendered image is on the rendered image layer. Just like in Illustrator, I can hide these layers clicking the little eyeball picture there, and I can lock these layers clicking that little empty square for a padlock to appear. Again, that works exactly the same way as in Illustrator. I now can't select or edit these images. Unlocking them allows me to edit and move them around once again. The last thing to notice is that in my links panel, the map.psd file has appeared, and that means that my map.psd file has successfully appeared. Now, there's a whole range of things that we can start to do. Not only can we move them around, we can also, like in Illustrator, move them on top of one another. So just like in Illustrator, whatever layer is on top means that that image has kind of priority. So at the moment, the bay is on top of the rendered image because the bay map layer is on top of the rendered image layer. If I wanted to flip these around, I'm going to move the layer, bay map, down below the rendered image layer. And now the rendered image is in front of the bay map. That works just the same as Illustrator. Moving them back, I can move the bay map back on top of the rendered image. Of course, I can also select both of these images and move them at the same time, and there's no issues with that in InDesign. Now, there's a whole other range of things I can do. So let's say I wanted to have my map on top of the rendered image for some reason, and I wanted to maybe resize the map so it's a nice fit and snug inside that image. But I also want to see the full rendered image. So what I want to do is I want to give this bay map an opacity, so I can actually start to make this transparent. So if I select the bay map and I go up to the top, and these are all my editing tools, this is the opacity kind of toolbar. If I select this, I can drag this point down, and just like in Illustrator and just like in Photoshop, I can give that image an opacity. So you can see as I slide it down, it begins to disappear, and as I slide it back up again, it begins to reappear. Really great tool. I'm going to leave that on about 85%. So you can just see the rendered image through the map. Now, the next thing that's really important is the reason I've left these files as a PSD and an AI rather than exporting them and bringing them in as PDFs is because one of the great features of InDesign is that I can actually edit these files in Illustrator or in Photoshop, and they'll update in InDesign. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So let's say, for example, I went to my bay map. This is the Blackwater Bay, and this is Roselle Bay. What I want to do is I want to remove Roselle Bay from this image and just have Blackwater Bay. I could do that on InDesign by ticking off AutoFit and dragging this box in to kind of cut it off there, but maybe I don't actually like how that looks and I want it to be a bit more kind of a gentle cut. So I'm just going to keep the bounding box back to the same size. And then again, if you double click on it, it's going to go back to its original size. So I'm just going to resize this and retick AutoFit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Photoshop, and in Photoshop, on my clipping mask, I'm actually just going to erase Roselle Bay from the image, like so. Then changing the hardness of my brush, I want that to be a really soft edge to the map for whatever reason. So once I've done that, I go, okay, that's what I want my image to look like. I'm going to save my Photoshop file. So go File, Save. That's saved, that's finished. Then when I go back to InDesign, what you'll notice is there's a little exclamation mark on the bounding box of the map image. Also in my links panel, there's a little exclamation mark next to the map image. This means that this file has been modified. So it's been changed and it knows it's been changed. If I double click on the little exclamation mark here, or if I double click on the little exclamation mark here, that image will update. And there it is. So I've erased Roselle Bay in Photoshop, and now it's erased in InDesign too. This is an incredibly useful tool. If you're putting a drawing together and you want to continue to edit your images, you can edit them in the relative program, and they'll update in InDesign. So for example, this is the Photoshop file. If I wanted to, for whatever reason, add a kind of a black square perhaps to my image, let's just say for some reason, and I wanted it to be in front, I go, yes, that looks great. I love that big black square on top of my render. Then the same thing, I go File, Save, and then I go back to InDesign, and again, just as before, I think it's just taking a little bit longer to save. Yep, so you can see up here, there's a percentage that it's saving at. So sometimes some things take a little bit longer than others to save. So I'm just going to pause the video until this is finished saving. That's finished saving now. So if I go back to InDesign now, once again, you can see that the image becomes a little bit fuzzy to show that, oh, it's been modified, so the rendering quality goes down a bit, and a little exclamation mark appears. If I double click on that exclamation mark, then it'll update. It's going to take a little bit of time. There we go. And it says the test file has got different layers than the imported version because I created a new layer. So it's just telling me what's happened on the image. I go, okay, that's fine. And there it is. There's the black square I drew on my rendered image. Now I can also, of course, go back into Illustrator, delete that red square, sorry, the black square, and then save it again. Once again, I'm just going to pause the video while this saves, so it's going to take a little while. Then once that is finished, I go back to InDesign. Again, it goes a bit fuzzy, telling me that it's been modified. I double click on the exclamation mark to update it, and the black square will disappear once it's loaded. There we go. Great. So that's the basics of editing files and resizing them in InDesign. Now, there is a benefit to bringing in exports. If you bring in an export, so I've actually got an export of this rendered image, so I'm just going to go File, Place, and I think it was called, maybe I don't. Whoops, no. No, I didn't. If you do export a file, so if I go back to Illustrator and I go File, Export As, and just make it a PNG, use the artboards, test PNG, go Export. Yes, high resolution, that's good. The benefit of doing an export is that it's a much smaller file size, and InDesign is going to be a lot faster. So if I go File and I go Place, then here's the same thing. It's essentially the same quality image. So if I just go Enter to bring it in, then this is actually, again, the same quality as this image, but the PNG, and you can see it over here in my links panel, it's appeared as a PNG, is not editable. So I can't change the file once I've exported it, but it is much, much easier for InDesign to work with. So there's a real benefit to either using the kind of the active file or the exported file, depending on what you want. If you're finished editing all your drawings and you know you're finished, then it's better to use PNGs and PDFs. If you haven't finished editing all of your drawings, then of course it's better to use the active files. So I'm actually just going to delete that export now to stop it from being confusing. Cool. Then the last thing I want to do is I also want to bring in my map. So this is my map. I'm also going to bring this in as an active file, although this is where I would 100% use an export. In fact, maybe I will. So what I'm going to do is with my map, I'm going to go File, Export, Export As, and I'm going to bring this in as a PNG because this file is way too big to be using as an active file, and I don't want to edit it. So export that, and I'm just going to pause the video while that's exporting. Wow, I'm very glad I paused the video because that took a really long time. So now that's been exported, I'm going to go back to InDesign. I'm going to preemptively make a new layer. I'm going to call it background, map. There we go, a bit hard for me for some reason. Then I'm going to lock my other layers, and I'm going to go File, Place, and there's my PNG. Go Open. Once again, I get a little thumbnail of the preview, and I'm just going to put it into that top right corner. And there's the background map that I want to use. Now, if I scroll in, ooh, that's quite low quality. I'm not sure why that's so low quality. So I probably didn't export it at high enough quality. So maybe just for the sake of the video, no, I'll just leave it there. It's fine. Great. So that is the basics of bringing in different file types, and you can start to put them on top of each other and all kinds of really cool things and start to resize them, putting things on top of one another if you wanted to. The next thing to know is how to save an InDesign file. So at first glance, you can go File, Save, and I can just save this as Test Composite. Go save the downloads. But what that's going to do is it's not actually going to save the links. So as mentioned, the links panel is really important. These are individual files that exist outside of InDesign. And they're kind of these separate files. So if I go to my downloads, there's the test.ai, there's the test.png, there's the park PNG, and there's the map. They're not embedded automatically into the InDesign file. We actually have to do that ourselves, and this might be one of the most important things in InDesign, is these files won't save if you just save the InDesign file. So what you have to do is you have to go File, and you have to go Package. Again, I cannot stress how important this is. If you want to save your work in InDesign, you have to go File, Package. So if I go File, Package, it gives me a whole bunch of settings. These are fine. I don't really need to worry about anything here. I go Package, then it tells me where I want to do it. I'm going to call it Test Composite Folder, yes. So copy links, good. Copy linked graphics, yes. Update graphic links in package, yes. Include IDML, yes. And include PDF, let's do it for now. Then select PDF preset, go high quality. Actually, no, go PDFX 3 2002. These are the settings you should use. You don't always have to include a PDF if you don't want to, though. Then I'm going to go package. That's going to package. It's probably going to take a little while, hopefully not too long. Might need to pause the video again. Yeah. Great, so that's finished now. So now if I go to my downloads folder, then there it is, test composite folder. So in this folder, if I open that folder, is going to be the PDF. So if I open that, there's a PDF of whatever I made in InDesign there. So, oh look, the PNG actually came through with pretty nice. So it actually exported pretty well, which is good. And if I zoom out, there's the little PDF of what I made in InDesign, some random little composite drawing. And then the other most important thing here is the InDesign file. So that's got all your InDesign, so the location, for example, like the placement of all your drawings in InDesign and all that stuff. The IDML, and then all your links are in the links folder. So now what you want to do is if you want to save this onto your Google Drive or onto a USB or something, I want to save that whole folder. Then if I save that whole folder and I open up my InDesign file, then everything is going to be there and it's going to be linked, which is good. Oh, I just opened up a second one. If you don't package your file and you don't save your links, then all of your links are going to become detached. So if I go into my downloads folder, for example, and I move these, just for example, these two files to my desktop, then you can see that they become all fuzzy. That's because they've become unlinked. And if you don't save your links in your InDesign file and you lose the links, then your InDesign file is now useless. So if you ever get this issue and you can't find your links, then what you can do is you can actually relink them from the links file. So if I click on the images, they get this little question mark when they've become missing. Then I go down here and I click on relink. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to relink them. Come on. That second image button. I'm actually just going to relink them to the links in the package. So if I click on the map file back in the package, then it tells me that it's searched the directory and it's actually found the other missing link for me, which is really great. And so now those images are going to reappear and they're relinked and everything is fine. Then I can go and package that again, which is great. The last two things to note are there's a couple of really useful settings in InDesign. So if your file starts to become really slow, you can actually lower the quality of the images. So if you go over to View on the top settings and you go Display Performance and you go Typical Display, so View, Display Performance, Typical Display, if you click on that, then the image quality on the InDesign file is going to degrade, but the program is going to become a lot faster. And then if for whatever reason you need to do it even more, you can go View, Display Performance, Fast Display, and then all your images just become like gray blocks, and the program is at its absolute fastest. If you want to bring those back, you just go Display Performance and High Quality Display to bring it back. The other thing you can do is down in the bottom left corner over here, you can change the view. So if I right click on this, there's a whole series of different views to go to. The most common of these two would be preview. So if I click on preview, all the little bounding boxes in the file disappear and you get an image of closer to what this would look like when you export it as, for example, a PDF. So if I go back to the PDF here, then this is what it looks like when, if I was to print it at a printer, that's what it's going to look like. By clicking on preview in InDesign, this is a closer kind of representation of what it would look like. There's also a really great hotkey for this. If you just press Shift W, it cycles between the different presentation methods. So this is presentation mode. If you just hit W, it cycles between normal view and preview. If you press Shift W, it goes into presentation mode. There you go. I will learn something new every day. Good. So in the next video, I'm going to go over how to add text and do kind of really cool things with typography, with the typography setting. But I think that's enough now for this video, for the introductory video. So I hope that was helpful, and good luck creating your composite drawings later on. Okay, bye.